Hey guys, this is Mrs. Joyce with a new poem for you. Okay, so this poem that we're looking at this week is War Photographer by Carol Anne Duffy. It's one of the more modern poems in the anthology, although it does have some references in it that you will need to look up in terms of context, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I hope you're doing well. As usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the poem. We're going to look at the form and the structure and a little bit about the context, and then we're going to go into depth on individual lines. There are some other excellent videos on this as well, so please feel free to not just use my information, use other people's information as well. So, poem is War Photographer. It's on page 3 of your anthology if you need my information. So, first things. Okay, before I start reading it, I'm just going to lift my camera up so we can see what it looks like on the page. And as you can see, we've got 4 stanzas of pretty much identical length. It kind of looks as you would expect a traditional poem to look. Okay, so in his darkroom, he is finally alone with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church and he, a priest, preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England. Home again to ordinary pain which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and the pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. Okay, so we're going to go up to the top first, and we're going to look at that title and the context. So first of all, if I just tell you a little bit about Carol Anne Duffy. As per usual, my colours mean nothing except the fact that I've highlighted it. I want you guys to be able to see the difference between the so it doesn't all turn into one colour. So Carol Anne Duffy, she's still alive, she's a modern poet. Those of you who came to see the Poetry Live, she was there. She used to be the Poet Laureate. She's only recently been retired from that. But that basically means, can I spell laureate? I think I can. Yay, I can spell laureate. So that basically means that she was paid by the royal family to write poems for them. And she's basically ridiculously famous. She has been on the GCSE for pretty much since I did my GCSEs. She's epic. And because she is epic, she's got her fingers in a lot of pies. She knows a lot of people, and one of the people she knows is a war photographer. And this war photographer, I cannot remember his name off the top of my head, but he's a very, very famous war photographer. And this poem is based upon her conversations with him and what he told her about being a war photographer. Now, it kind of seems, as a title, it seems a little bit oxymoronic, doesn't it? The idea of, war is quite violent, obviously, duh. Whereas photographer is a bit frivolous, isn't it? When we think about photographer, we think about weddings and birthday parties and photo shoots and models. We don't think about war. And what we have to think about with this is when we're thinking about this character, because this protagonist, this voice is a character. Okay, so the narrative voice. It's not Carol Anne Duffy talking about her own experiences. It's her narrating the experiences that she imagines somebody similar to her friend would have had. And what we have to think about is we have to think about when we are in a situation, when we take a picture, despite the fact that we are observers, we are still part of the story. And you will hear this when you listen to wildlife photographers, or I don't know whether you've ever seen David Attenborough's animal documentaries, and how they are not supposed to stop it when they see something horrible happening, you know, a baby animal being ripped to pieces. And it's the same with a war photographer. He's not supposed to get involved in the war. He's there to document it. But very specifically, because he's a photographer, he's there to take pictures of things that people in other countries won't have seen. Now, in order for you to be able to understand a lot of this, you are going to need to understand how photographs used to be developed. Obviously, today's photographs, you know, take your phone, you press go, and oh look, pretty picture. But when this poem was written, digital photography was pretty much non-existent. I remember the very first digital camera I ever got my hands on, I was 18. So this poem predates that. So this is how photographs were traditionally, and God, it sounds awful, doesn't it? It makes you feel really old. Traditionally developed. So there's a few terms in here which you really will need to look up. And I strongly suggest that what you do is you hit YouTube and you write in how are photos developed, and you watch how it's actually done, because it's fascinating. But it's going to take a long time for me to explain. So I'm just going to go over it on a surface level here so that you guys actually get the specifics from somebody who probably knows the process a little bit better than I do. So let's have a look at this very first stanza. In his darkroom, he is finally alone with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. Okay, so first of all, the darkroom. A darkroom is where photos are developed. Okay, so this is the technical term for a room where photos are also are developed. But also we have this idea of the fact that it's dark, and that darkness kind of gives us the impression of, it's not quite pathetic fallacy, but it gives us this idea that he's in a dark room because he's in a dark mood, because he's finally alone. Okay, he's come home from wherever he's been, and he's finally allowed to be by himself. Okay. And you should have noticed that it's third person, his darkroom. Okay, so as we said, it's not like Remains or any of the other, Exposure, I think it's another first person one. This is a third person narrative. So it's kind of removed, kind of set aside from the actual person who is speaking. And it's, a lot of the time, a third person narrative is sometimes referred to as godlike, because third person, you know everything, you know what's going on in people's heads. And this really comes through with this poem, a godlike narrator, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. Now, this is quite an interesting one, because we've got this spools of suffering, which is obviously some sibilants. But the spools, I don't know whether you've ever seen what a film looks like before it's developed, but it's those long strips of plastic, for want of a better word, I can't think of the technical term for it. But so we have this sibilance, and it just kind of suggests that they just go on forever and they don't stop because there's so many of them. So we've got the sibilants, and they're ordered rows, okay, and we've got this organisation. His room is very organised. He is very organised. And when we look at the next couple of lines, those ordered rows start to make a little bit more sense as well. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church, and he, a priest, preparing to intone a mass. So, with this whole idea here, we've got this kind of extended metaphor here. The only light's red. The reason the light is red is because that's the only light you can have in a darkroom. It's linked to photography and the process of development. So it's a soft light. It's very, very. In fact, you've probably seen this. If you ever watched the TV show Stranger Things, and the characters are in so the second or third season, I can't remember, when they're working at the newspaper with the photography, and you're in the darkroom there. That's what it looks like. That's exactly it. And I must remember that. Okay, so this again is to do with the darkroom. And it's interesting that we've got this idea of it being dark and red, because when we think about dark and red, we don't often think about church. We think about the opposite. We think about hell. Okay, darkness, red, death. It's quite a scary sort of light. But no, Carol Anne Duffy compares it to a church, as though this were a church. Now, this is a simile, because we've got that as. But then she expands the simile into this extended metaphor. A priest preparing to intone a mass. Now, this is quite interesting, because when we think about what a priest does, okay, first of all, you should have worked out, I'm hoping you knew, that a mass is a church service, okay? And it's a regular thing, okay? This is something he is familiar with. Something he does regularly. It's almost ritual-like. Like a priest, every week, every Sunday, everybody comes in, he does the blessing, he does everything he's meant to do, because it's a ritual and everybody goes through it. So he's developing these photos, and it's this kind of sombre atmosphere. That word, intone, okay? It's not speaking, it's all in one voice and very sombre and very calm. And it's this, it's almost beyond speech, okay? When you intone something, it's usually because you've memorised it. And that again links to this idea of the ritual, okay? And then we have this last few words. Very, very short sentences, all one word sentences really. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. Now, just to give you ideas, obviously Belfast is in Ireland. Phnom Penh is in Cambodia, and Beirut is in, just check, Lebanon, Middle East. Sorry, knew I'd forget that. Okay, so these are all places where war and conflict has occurred. I'll move the sheet back in a second. So these are all places he's been to. And the listing there, it's kind of like they've all blended into one, especially when they get that all flesh is grass at the end of this first stanza. So they kind of blend. They're all the same. Despite the fact the conflict is different and what people are fighting for is different, it's not different really. It's still people killing people. And then we have this line, all flesh is grass. Now, all flesh is grass is a quote from the Bible. It's from Isaiah 46. Not 46, 46. And it means, and I'm going to draw a little arrow down here, sorry, this page is getting really messy. It means that all human life ends. Which is ridiculously depressing, but fairly accurate. If there's one thing we all know, it's that everybody's going to die, people. So, as I said, it's all blended in. It's all become the same thing. People die, and he is there to document it. So those really, really short sentences, it kind of makes them stand out. It slows down the pace. And really make us feel kind of, oh, I don't know, at, it's almost like they're bullets being shot at you. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, those plosives. That's the word I was looking for. They're all places that would be very, very familiar to a contemporary audience. Us today, looking back at this, I know those names, but they were, you know, sort of like historical to me. So you guys probably don't know of them. So it's worthwhile you looking up those and actually getting a little bit more understanding of what happened in each of those conflicts. Okay. So if we look back at that line, as I said, about the spools of suffering and ordered rows, we could also link that into that metaphor about a church, almost like being pews. I don't know, it's up to you what you think. So, if we look at that, we'll also see that we've got a little bit of rhyme in there. We've got rose, glows, and mass and grass. And if we look in the next one, because Carol Anne Duffy is northern, she says grass. And if you've heard her read this, she does actually say grass. So if we look at the next stanza, we see trays and then again, feet and heat. So it's the same pattern. So we have a regular rhyme pattern, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, those seem to now. Okay, so he doesn't see this as something personal. He's trying not to see it as personal. He's got a job to do. Very simple sentence, very focused. He's focusing on what he's doing. Pen. He's focused. Okay, and it's monosyllabic as well. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but when I'm happy, joy, joy, Mrs. Joyce, I tend to be quite florid in the way I speak. When I don't want someone to talk to me, you can tell because I've got one word sentences. I've got monosyllabic. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Go away. And that's the sort of atmosphere that's being created here. It's that whole, yeah, I've got to do this. Yeah, I've got to get on. I have to focus. He doesn't want to, but he's doing it there. And then we've got more of that sibilance then. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands. It's all really quite messy. It's a very physical job, developing photographs. But that physical description, it's almost like he's focusing on the physicality of it. She's focusing on the physicality of it because in a minute we're going to go into the emotional side of things, which did not tremble then, those seem to now. And that's really quite interesting. When you think he's a photographer, his hands are hugely important to him. I don't know whether you've ever taken a photograph when when you're really overexcited or upset or something. The camera's wobbling everywhere. But here, his hands are trembling when he's away from the conflict. He's home. Okay, and when we think about why our hands tremble, they tremble because we're scared, because we're sad, because we're experiencing negative emotions. But he's not experiencing them when he's in the field, for want of a better word, when he's on the job. He's experiencing them now when he's come home. And that's quite an interesting one. You could link that to Remains quite nicely, actually, how the fact that Rob is perfectly, well, he's not perfectly fine, but he copes with everything while he's on his tour. He comes home and that's when he gets knocked in the face by the PTSD. And it's almost like, he's not focused on what he's taking pictures of. He's now back to, now he's home. He can now react to what he's seen, because he is a civilian. He's not a soldier. He's not been trained to kill or be killed. He has been trained to point a camera and press a button. This is not what he was trained for. And then we see where he is, rural England. And when we compare that to these places where he was up here, that juxtaposition there is really, really clear. Where am I going to write this? Let's come down here. Hope you can read this. So home again to ordinary pain. Now, again, a lot of this is about what she's not saying. Ordinary pain, okay? Life going on. Home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel. You know, that constant thing. I mean, you can tell you British are complaining about the weather. And so what she's saying there is, yes, he's got ordinary pain in England, but that means that when he's in the field, when he's out at war, there is more than ordinary pain. It's what she's not saying. Or we could look at that in a different way, and we could say that actually he's so used to this, remember this is a ritual, that this is ordinary pain to him. Seeing what he's seen is ordinary. It's no different from what he's used to. This is his life. Which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. So we've got that, oh God, this image here is just fantastic. To fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Fields in rural England, okay? Fields are not supposed to explode. Fields are supposed to be full of cows going moo, okay? Fields are supposed to be full of corn, to be full of flowers. They're not supposed to explode. So again, we've got this juxtaposition of the fields here and the fields in the war zone. Okay, I'm going to pop that here just so you know that that's linked there. And then which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Now this running children image here, don't know whether you'll have seen this. I can imagine that Miss Lockhart and Mr. Van Heiningen and Miss Tyso have probably shown you this picture. But there is a very, very famous picture of a child running covered in napalm. And the images of her, it was on the front cover of National Geographic, I believe, during the Vietnam War. And what happened was, this photographer took this photograph of this child running away from a village which had been napalmed. Now, napalm is liquid fire. And she's running away completely naked because her entire body has been engulfed in flames, and she's ripped her clothes off because she is so terrified, and she is running screaming from this village. She's still alive, this woman. So obviously she was a child during the Vietnam War, and she actually now works with NATO, I believe it is, looking at survivors of horrific conflict. But that is what this image is. It's that idea of nightmare heat. This isn't just hot weather. This is unnatural heat. This is fire. This is war. This is hell. I'm getting all overexcited. Okay, so in the first stanza, he's sitting there, he's preparing to develop the photos. In the second one, he's starting to have the effects of being in these war zones going on. Now, the third stanza, things change slightly. We're not talking about, all of this up here is very general, okay? It's very, very general story of what's going on when he's there. This bit here is very specific. Something is happening. So it's almost like we're coming out of his head and we're moving into the actual what's going on in the room. Remember that godlike narrator idea. So it's almost like Carol Anne Duffy's been sat in his head listening to his thoughts, and now she's coming out and she's seeing what's going on. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. So this is obviously one of the photographs he's developing. It's a stranger. Remember, photographs, we're used to taking photographs of our friends, but he's not taking a photograph of his friend. He's taking a photograph of a stranger. Faintly start to twist before his eyes. And obviously, well, not obviously, sorry. When you develop a photograph, if you've ever seen a Polaroid go, it starts very, very faintly and then starts to become stronger. So it doesn't look like a real person, which is why this kind of ironic description here, a half-formed ghost. Now, there are two ways to read this. The first is the literal metaphor here, which is, how can I get this in here? So number one. So this is a more literal reading of the metaphor, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, literal metaphor. Okay, the picture isn't quite there yet. So it looks like a ghost. If you remember back to when we were doing A Christmas Carol, and we were talking about how the Victorians used to create ghost photography, it was underexposed photographs, or photographs that were overexposed, so you'd have two people in this double exposure, and that's why, you know, half-formed ghost. If you've not exposed something properly, it starts to look like it's not real, it's not quite there, it's see-through. But the second one is really, really quite dark. Okay, a ghost is a dead person. This is a half ghost. This is someone who is going to die, because we see that in the second half of the stanza. He remembers the cries of this man's wife. So not only is this stranger dying in front of him, but this stranger was dying in front of his own wife. How he sought approval without words to do what someone must. So he's not just seen this person die. He's looked at this person's wife and said, basically with his eyes, you know, body language, can I take this picture? And it's interesting how he says to do what someone must. Remember, he's documenting this. He wants people to know this. It's this whole idea of the fact that someone has to know about this horror that's going on. It's almost his duty. So it's his duty, and I mean, the actual concept of sitting there and the cries of this man's wife. I mean, this implies that this isn't a soldier that's being seen, it's a civilian. He's not just taking photographs of dead soldiers or soldiers at war. He's taking photographs of civilians being killed. This is modern warfare. This isn't soldier versus soldier. This is people versus people. And when we think about going back to Remains again, I think this makes an absolutely fantastic pair with Remains. It's why you did Remains last week and you're doing this one this week. This man's wife, this civilian, it's almost like this could be taking photographs of what's been going on with Rob. You know, especially when you look at this next line here and how the blood stained into foreign dust. You know, it's that blood shadow, isn't it? It's that violent image. And You know, it's foreign to him, it's not foreign to the man, but that concept of somebody, as soon as they're gone, there's nothing left except the blood on the floor. And when we think about blood, and we think about Macbeth, and we think about what blood is related, blood stains are to do with guilt. It's almost like his mind has been stained by this. And then we go away from that instant, you know, snapshot, irony there, that snapshot in that stanza, and we move away again. So we've kind of zoomed back out. 100 agonies in black and white. So obviously he's talking about the photograph. We're talking about the photographs here, but they're all pain. All those photographs are painful. There is nothing there that isn't painful, from which his editor, so the person in charge of him, will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. Now, a supplement is basically a magazine that comes with a newspaper. So suddenly we've gone from war to the reality, okay? He is paid to take these photographs so that they can be chucked in a newspaper. So he's gone through all of this, all of that effort for 5 or 6 pictures. For Sunday's supplement. And then this next line just really is the crux of the matter. This is what he feels. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. It doesn't matter to them. I mean, we've got that internal rhyme there. But it's that whole idea of the fact that, yes, they're upset. Of course they're upset. They've just seen a picture of a child or a man or a woman being shot. But then they shut things up and go for a beer before they have their Sunday lunch. Yeah? It's removed from them. The people reading it don't change. They'll forget. They don't really care. Or rather, they care, but it's not part of their experience, so therefore they feel there's nothing they can do about it, so let's move on to something else. From the aeroplane, so he's gone back. This is the other thing here, okay? He goes back. He stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. All of that for 5 photographs that no one pays attention to. Okay. And what, yeah, that they do not care, and he's earning his living as well. So it's that whole idea of the fact that, yeah, he's not doing this for any other reason other than money, but he is doing it for a reason other than money, but yeah, gets paid anyway. So it's a massively bleak poem. Okay, it's really bleak. It's really powerful though. It's this idea of being the observer. These poems aren't just about war. when you think about the ones that you've read so far, okay, so you've done Exposure, you've done Bayonet Charge, you've done Remains, you've done Charge of the Light Brigade, they are, yeah, they're very, very much about soldiers. And then this one's not about soldiers. This is about an observer. This is about a civilian, okay? And there are a couple more that are like this as well. We're going to go on to do Kamikaze next week, which is about the cost of war with families, and the same with Poppies. But I think that this poem is interesting because it's an observer of war, but he's on the front lines, okay? He's not standing back and seeing what will come. It's all about being there and observing from the perspective of somebody who has not been trained to go out and kill, who is simply there to watch. And the thought of being in a situation where you are that powerless is, you know, it's quite mentally draining, I think, as well as, you know, traumatic. This man has watched all of this unfold in front of him, and there's nothing he can do. He doesn't even decide which of the photos go into the paper. You know, his editor does. He doesn't even have the power to decide what the story will be. So if we take a look at the structure now. So we've already identified that it is a regular structure. So regular stanzas. We've got a regular rhyme scheme. With some internal rhyme. You should have noticed from the way I was reading that we do have quite a bit of enjambment in here. And that enjambment's very good, because enjambment basically tends to represent that the problem is ongoing. We've got that whole sort of zoom in stanza 3 as well. Where we go from his emotions and just the sort of general consensus to this very specific section here. So I've just realised that when I do that you can't actually see it because I've blocked the light. And yeah, that's War Photographer. Bleak, depressing. Look up how photographs are properly, why can't I never remember this word, never properly developed. And watch a couple of other videos on it as well. There will be a worksheet that goes with this. It's an amazing poem about a really, really depressing subject, but it is a brilliant poem to compare to because there's so much in it. You can compare to Remains, any of the war poems that we've done so far, but the power struggles that are in here, it works very well with poems like My Last Duchess, on the idea of powerlessness. Charge of the Light Brigade to do with power. You've also got things like, it works very well with Kamikaze, which we've not done yet, and some of the other poems about power like Emigre and Tissue it works well with because of the idea of paper, and also the idea of checking out history when we're talking about what we remember and the documentation of things. Sorry, just move that down. So, got any questions? Chuck them in the comments, chuck them to me on Show My Homework. Hopefully I will see you soon because we are in lockdown. And so hopefully I will see you all again soon. This video is going up now, and see you soon. Bye.